Hello and welcome to another fantastic ICMI 2021 video. I am joined here with Vernon, and today we are talking with AJ Mahari. How are you doing today?
Very well, thank you.
So for those who don't know, AJ Mahari is a counselor who helps people with trauma recovery, in BD, BPD, and NPD, and codependency recovery. Now, not surprising to many of you, her clientele is largely male. So, my first question for you today is what brought you into this field of counseling? Was it something you always wanted to do, or did you have some personal experience that led you to helping others with this?
Well, that's a great question. It really comes from my family of origin, my childhood, what I went through, healing recovery therapy for many years. So it was really lived experience. And if I could just start off by saying that it's such a sacred honor to work with men, I work with mostly men, and that I never could have dreamed this would be the case because, so I'm paying forward my own healing, but I'm a woman mostly working with men. And I had a narcissistic, psychopathic with dark triad trait father who was extremely abusive. So it just seems a blessed journey to me. And now to be, continually getting more aware of men's issues because when I was growing up, buying lies of feminism, living with a misogynist in the house, and then having to work along, like a good 10 years at not, quote, hating men. And I've come a long way. So I'm very passionate about this. And and I just want to say it's such a sacred honor. So it's lived experience. And then I had to find my own way through a lot of healing. And then it was just, I wanted to pay that forward. And the only other thing I would say is it's such a sacred honor to help men to work to find the fullness of what they deserve as well, and often don't know in terms of not being familiar with their feelings or how to process them, how to relate, etc., because they're so worried about having to be what is a man supposed to be. So it just been quite a journey for me and continues to be.
What were your first steps to question the feminist lies, as you said?
Yeah, that's a tough question because I think for a long time I wasn't really involved in following feminism, or but I must have been coming from a place of the idea because of the father I had. I had this idea that, yeah, kind of like, wow, women, we are so oppressed, and that kind of thing. And I think it was just when I started actually, maybe when I was in university learning, but more to the point when I started working, and just started encountering a lot of male clients. And I'm very, I work in a very down to earth, client centered way. And then I just kept hearing so many similar things from so many men. And I just started to learn a lot. And then, like, I have an open mind. And so I was learning all the way along. And it culminated with the Red Pill documentary, and not only seeing all of, and in learning all about what that was showing us, but also identifying with KCJ and her journey. And I was never really like into feminism, but yeah, I might have had a bit of a mindset still that I was unaware of, sort of like not really thinking about it much. That was, yeah, like when I first started hearing men telling me what they were telling me, in the back of my head, I would get confused, as a woman. So, but I just think that I never really I understood when I was a kid, or what I was going through then, more about maybe in the 60s in feminism or something, but even that's problematic. But then after that, certainly I just couldn't understand. And I'll just say, in the last 5 years, 8 years, whatever, I don't know what fifth wave or whatever wave we're on now, far left feminists are screaming about. I just don't even understand it.
So, going along with some of the lies that you talked about of feminism, um, what sort of things have you noticed, especially in the relation of what men have revealed to you, or more specifically, what insights have you gained about men that may be amiss by feminists?
Well, number one, men are people too. And I don't, I think there's this feminism. Well, okay. What I think, well, what I know I've learned is that there's a real view of, and I don't know if that's a toxic femininity or just feminism or if how they're separated, but men seem to be seen by a lot of women or feminism as objects or as like they're supposed to be a certain way, whatever that means, and they're not seen or related to, men aren't seen or related to for the people that they are, and then they're struggling maybe from their own childhoods with not having been taught that it's okay to feel and be a person. So it's almost like men have been being robbed of personhood, and men do mostly all the dangerous, difficult, maybe life risk type jobs. Like a lot of women just look at men as, well, when you need something heavy lifted, call a guy. When you even in relationships, it's like, well, the man is supposed to do all this other stuff. And then it might be like come down to, I've heard a lot of men say, well, like they didn't know how to be in a relationship. I mean, with the woman they were with or women they've encountered, because women are kind of saying, be my protector, but wait a minute, I'm equal and I don't need you. I think the number one thing I see that really astounds me is men aren't seen by a lot of women as people. More like a stereotypical role of what a man should be, and like men are people too.
How can we inspire women to, view men as the opposite and as actually view them as human? What is it? Compassion? Is it more empathy, or is it something else? Or
I think that a lot of women, again, I think it goes back to socialization and family. There's a whole lot of things going on in our culture. I think women need to open up their minds, and I guess probably more than not, many women, and especially I think even younger women today, are just there's some notion or somewhere they will encounter, whether it's formal or very informal, these feminist ideas. That somehow, I don't know, like I think a lot of it has to do with a lot of women are so like, but what about us? But what about what I need? What about the man, what the man is supposed to be, or whatever each woman thinks a man is supposed to be? And I don't think there's a lot of, again, it's depersonalizing, dehumanizing men, because they're not really looking for, who is this man I'm relating to in whatever way of relating, that who is this man as a person? I still don't think that a lot of women see men for the person they are, and even when they're in intimate relationships.
So, going beyond not seeing men as people, what observations have you made about women's personality, especially with the bipolar disorder and other personality disorders? What traits have you noticed of women? And is there like a common thread, like a common thing that you see, or what?
Well, and actually, it's borderline personality disorders I deal with, not the bipolar. But yeah, like first of all, people with BPD are women with BPD. Well, same for men, but we're talking about women here. They don't grow up. Like just to put it simply, they have usually a lot of trauma in their childhoods or whatever. Often it's by mother, sometimes it's by father. So they're looking. What happens in these relationships, kind of both ways across the genders, is that the people with BPD, women with BPD, don't understand that they're looking for a parent, through a partner, and it's an unconscious process. And so whether they're with a man or whether it's a woman, who has so whether it's the man is with a woman with BPD or a woman is with a man with BPD, but we'll focus more on the first. The problem is that they're not even relating to the person to begin with, right? Because they're seeing like they're not really capable of healthy relationships, so they're seeing the other person or the partner the man as a parent, object, other sort of representation. And so that really sets up a situation where it's like a double whammy of the man isn't going to be seen as a human being and the man isn't being seen for who he is, if that makes any sense. It's a little bit, it's a very skewed situation in those type of relationships. And they're very toxic. And we want to focus on men here. So, but, the one thing I have noticed is that women who are in relationships with personality disordered males handle it better. They're still traumatized, but they have ways of coping that men don't have. Similar ways to cope. Not all men, but many, after they've encountered like a borderline or a narcissistic woman.
So can you actually describe borderline personality disorder for me? I mean, I know it's talked about a lot, but I haven't really been able to come up with a consistent way to describe it myself. It's a bit of a dumb question, but in case anybody else has questions about that, I'd like to know.
Well, yeah, I mean, there are 9 traits. I can't probably ramble off right now. I should be able to, but borderline personality is really about usually trauma, but there's a smaller percentage where it's perception. But there's confusion about whether there's any genetics or, they say it's a mix of nature and nurture. But what happens is that, there's an unstable sense of self, tremendous fear of abandonment, there's attachment trauma in childhood, so that, there's a lack of knowing self, and there's an inability to really relate to others, to communicate. They take everything personally. They have a lot of emotional dysregulation, mood shifts, because really what it is essentially is they're carrying all this trauma from childhood, and then they easily get triggered and they misperceive things, and then they externalize out, or they might internalize, but one way or the other, they end up thinking that everything they feel and that's happening, and especially in relationships, is the other person's fault, or everything that happens to them is everybody else's fault. And they lack self-awareness because they have arrested emotional development, is probably the best way to put it. So there's like 9 traits that are listed, and I mean, impulsive, risky behavior, the abandonment fears, unstable sense of identity. I can't remember all the rest of them, but it's really a trauma response. It's called mental illness, and it is very difficult to treat. People can be treated, but but a lot of people won't go to treatment. And the other thing I just wanted to say about it, knowing that we have a focus here on men, but it is diagnosed in men at about the same rate as women.
So, taking everything in that you've said so far, I want to make an observation, and I want to see how you feel about this observation. The biggest problem we talked about family of origin, but that we're not arming kids with the tools that they can use to help themselves later in life. And with girls, maybe they suffer abuse, and so do boys, but with girls, it almost seems like the world today tells girls there's nothing wrong with you. Whereas boys, they tell them there's everything wrong with you. Mm-hmm. So when they grow up, girls don't think that there's anything wrong with them, so it has to be all men's fault. And men, because everything is their fault, they don't have any avenues to resolve their personal problems. Would that be a fair assessment?
I think that's the experience of, yeah, I mean, I don't know, like, I'm always uncomfortable to say all women or all men, but I think that probably, like, for some women, there's going to be issues with men, but that's not the whole issue for men. If they, like, family of origin is so important because of, what's father like, right? What's mother like? And that's going to determine how people feel. But I think culturally, and even going back to when I was a kid and how things have been changing, I would agree that I think women are just, even if you're not in the best of a household, like, like an abusive family, I think girls do just, there's insecurities there too, but I don't think they get the same, how can I put this? Like, I think boys are just expected to be okay. just kind of like left more to their own devices to kind of grow up. Because I think girls get, even if you don't get a lot of nurture, there's still something there. Whereas I think for boys, there might be some nurture, but there could be too much nurture. But I think often, especially at a certain age, and very young actually, maybe 5, 6, 7, that boys are just expected to sort of know something magically about how to be in the world or who they are. So I think girls are catered to much more in that regard. And I think also the biggest difference there is girls are allowed to feel. And I think even in this day and age, people are still raising boys with the idea that you're not supposed to do that.
Why do we think about this way for boys? Why do we magically, think that they magically know this, or they're always okay, or they can't afford not to be okay? Why is that?
Yeah, I'm not really sure. And if I could just sort of put an anecdotal experience to this, when I was much younger and I used to, be in sports and coaching sports, and I coached boys and girls like separately, but I always remember an incident, like I might have been 20, and a little boy in practice, I think we were dealing with 7, 8, 9-year-old boys, and something happened, and he was upset, and one might say acting out, but like a girl could act out, but I had to chase the little guy around the arena, and I'm like, I remember his name. I'm like, Paul, what's the matter? Paul, what's the matter? And he was just really having a tough time. And then I caught myself because I was already in university and I was learning some things, even though whatever happened to my family of origin. But he started to cry. He fell down on the ice. He was really having a difficult emotional time. And what I said to him first thing was, come on, man, like that whole thing, be toughen up, like you're okay, you got this. And then I went, what am I doing? So at that point, the man that I was, co-coaching with came over, and then because he was still flailing around and stuff with the skates on, so he went over to his father, but we later found out, or I guess my co-coach knew, but his mother had just walked out of the family. And so there I was going behind him. What's the matter, Paul? What's the matter? Like with empathy. And then like that would have been a horrible experience, the wrong way to approach it. But even at that age, like I only share that to say that that's how inculcated I was. And in one other incident, like when one of the little boys fell down on the ice in a game and got hurt, or felt hurt, wasn't a severe injury or anything, and was crying, I go out on the ice and I'm like, come on, you got this, like sort of like toughen up. And wow. And it's wrong. And I don't know, it's so, unless people educate themselves, it seems to be some kind of a default position. And I don't really know why, but I think if you go back, way back, like 50 plus years ago, it must have been even worse. But I just think it's the way that the human species has evolved wrongfully, that parents, again, they just treat males differently, which is not giving them the same opportunity to be human and to know who they are and to know what it means to be them, regardless, like not to separate them out from being male, but to not have everything be about the fact that they're male. Because I think that's where a lot of understanding little boys gets lost in when they're being parented as well.
So I am reading from your website, and it says that you are a life story coach, a methodology that helps clients reframe life narratives and rewire their brains. Mm-hmm. So I'm very curious what this is, and what is the methodology that you...
Well, basically, it's sort of cognitive behavioral CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, kind of underpins that, but it's for people to get in touch more with men in particular, what are they feeling, what's happened, to try to become more aware. So the story, the narrative, is a way to educate people, to help them learn what's happened, why are they hurting, what are they believing, what are the negative core beliefs. And often with men, it has all to do with that they're not supposed to feel. I mean, I'm not sure that a man, if I just straight up said, what are your negative core beliefs? They go, well, I'm not allowed to feel. But it always kind of comes to that in one way or another. So in that sort of life story methodology, anything in therapy that helps someone to look at the cognitive negative core beliefs and look at their experience and why they hurt and what's connecting them to wanting to go back, say, to a woman that, like, in a relationship that's been abusive or betrayed them or cheated on them, and what's driving all of this. Any therapy, the life story coaching as well, but any therapy can help rewire the brain with neuroplasticity. And then what that's about in a cognitive behavioral sense is finding oneself and learning, who you really are in totality. And for men, that involves really getting into the emotional landscape and really changing the negative core beliefs and the narrative. And believe it or not, more and more men that I work with today, they're aware that there's something there. They don't really know what it is, but they know that they need to feel, and it's something that they don't know how to do. Not every man. Some men will cry right away because they're so frustrated, they're so hurt, they feel so confused. And so that's kind of what's behind that, which mixes in with other things. I hope that made sense.
So you seem to be a very down-to-earth sort of counselor from what I'm seeing. So given the views you have here, what sort of reception have you had from your peers and your colleagues, if you had any sort of reception in that regard?
Well, I have my own practice, and I mostly work online, so I don't really... I think where I've gone in how I work with people, and men in particular, I don't know where my colleagues are at with that. I would suspect that, I'm not trying to say, oh, I'm like some hero or anything, but I would suspect there's a lot of other mental health professionals out there that are getting, men hopefully too, but women, but I would suspect there's still not enough female mental health professionals who are who are looking at this. And then there's a plethora also that prefer to work with women. And I think that what I've noticed in my practice is that there must be a reason why so many men have been coming to me for 31 years, and that I think that there's a need, and it depends, not every man is the same, but there's things they didn't get in childhood, right? Because even as little boys, a lot of mothers don't do the nurturing of little boys the way they do of their little girls. And so, I'm sorry, I can't remember what you asked me, but I think it kind of all goes back to the family again. And in mental health, I don't really know, but I still think I'm sure there's a lot of clinicians out there who understand this, but I'm sure there's more that don't, sadly enough still. And I've had clients come to me that have gone to men first, and no offense against those men, because they've been inculcated probably in a very similar way. And not that they're not going to be open to their clients' feelings, but maybe for some reason for a lot of men it's harder to open with a man. I don't know. And that's another thing that is, like, I don't know what that's really like, but I've had that reported to me, more than several times. So, and not to say that all male counselors wouldn't be good with men, of course, but I still think there's many more women that need to wake up to this. I really do.
So going back to what you talked about, the Red Pill film, and in a lot of ways it woke you up to a lot of things that you sort of already believed, but it kind of brought it all together for you.
Mm-hmm.
But I imagine that's where you really first heard about the men's movement, or did you know of the men's movement, and what were your thoughts of it?
Actually, I might have heard about it. I'll be honest with you, because this is like a little embarrassing, but I might have heard of it from time to time across the years, but I didn't really understand it, and nobody ever really took enough time to tell me more about it, because we're focused on the client, and they might have mentioned it. But I think another turning point and what led me to watching the Red Pill documentary was a client that I had. And like, I live in Ontario, Canada, and so did he. And I mean, everything that could have gone wrong for this man in his life, having been with a borderline woman, having children, just everything going against him and every step in the way of any legal process, with other mental health professionals, etc. He had, and at first I was like really thinking to myself, could this even be, like, I was not doubting him entirely, but there was so much. And I was like, how could this be that he's fighting everybody? What is this about? And then I learned more and I learned more. And this is a man who actually, 2 or 3 or 4 counselors, 3 or 4 lawyers, a couple of politicians. He took on, he just prepared his case so well. The essence of it was parental alienation from his children, which was horrible, and that's another thing that goes on all the time with these relationships. I mean, in general, it can happen, but if it's a borderline or a narcissist, and the courts don't recognize all this. But this one client of mine specifically, he's the one that mentioned the Red Pill documentary to me, and you know, he went to court finally, had his day in court in Ontario after many times of being dismissed, and he won everything. And it was amazing, but all the time it took him to do that, his children were then young adults. And yes, they were going to build a different relationship, but he lost all that time. And so he mentioned the Red Pill documentary. And when I watched it, I was and then, you know, when Jordan Peterson came along, it just put a lot of more pieces in place for me. But when I watched that documentary, that's when I really woke up fully to like, oh my God, what's going on here? You know, and I hadn't heard of, maybe a few years ago with that client, but I don't think I knew of International Men's Day, to tell you the truth. So something that I feel like really passionate about, by the way. So, I mean, the more that I can learn, one thing I've said on my YouTube channel, and it might sound silly because, you know, I'm not a man. So I can't say that I know first person what all men are going through. But I think I know, and I'm learning more, so I think I know about as much as a woman could know. Like, I leave it kind of there, because I can't. So when I'm relating, you know, with clients, etc., and I hear them, and you know, one thing that still moves me so much, I just wanted to add in, and this might be something that says something positive and negative, is that when a male client cries, it affects me much more than, like, I feel like it's so sacred and so important, and it affects me much more than when a woman cries. And I don't know if that's a good or bad thing. But it just really, sorry, I was just going to say, but I really feel like when I see that in a man, that we're getting somewhere, and it's really important, and it's important for women too, but it just seems like it's more difficult for men to get there.
I really appreciate that you just said that. I mean, if there's anyone that's going to be an expert on men, you're probably on the short list of that. But even you say, there's only so much I can understand because I'm a woman, because I'm not a man. I can't fully understand. But we live in this day and age where so many women will claim that they understand men simply because men are not complicated. They're just a one kind of person thing. So I greatly appreciate that you say that, because I think maybe that's the starting point to all of this, is we need to say, as women, we don't understand men, and we cannot just write them all off. So, coming to my question. So, what kind of services do you think we need in this world? I mean, certainly you're a great resource for men, but there's only one of you. What kind of services do you think we need more of in this world to help men?
Well, I think we need a lot more mental health services. I think we also need to do, I don't know how or what's happening right now, but there needs to be a real huge societal shift in the way that little boys are being parented. You know, and I'm not saying that doesn't mean that all parents aren't maybe doing better now and doing things differently, but I think that that's where it all begins. And then I think also that women, you know, like, if I'm any example, and I'm not certainly all women by any means, but women grow up with, there's no education about this. And then you just kind of grow up with the idea that like the old notion still really hangs. I don't know about younger generations, but this idea that women were oppressed for so long, and whatever happened hundreds of years ago or whatever was going, who cares? But in our day and age now today, that's not the way it is, and I think that that's still just something that gets somehow, that's what little girls pick up. And I think it still goes back to the family, and it goes back to parenting, but it also goes to educating people. And we have so many challenges across the board on that, but the best way I know how to put it is, I don't have all the answers, but men need to be seen as people too, because I think that that's the biggest problem, is that they're not seen as people. And there's this sort of mythology and or expectation of what men are supposed to be, and women have a lot to do, a lot of different ideas about that. And then there's also the way that unfortunately men, because they haven't had a chance to just be fully who they are and that be okay, then they don't know how to be with each other often either. Like there's some men that are more tuned in and more aware of their feelings and their personhood, but then they have a lot of buddies or a father or a brother that doesn't get it and doesn't want to, and so then they're sort of isolated away from other men. So I think that's the challenge as well, which I'm sure your movement and men that are finding out about this and growing and learning, I'm sure there's lots of support systems among men. But I think women really have to get educated. I think really women have to open their eyes to what's really happening for men. And I just wanted to say too, I don't know how many years ago it was when that, when if I can say the company name, Gillette came out with that toxic masculinity ad. I was like, what the hell? What is with this? Because like men and women are supposed to, and whether one is, like I'm not a straight woman, but men and women are supposed to, okay, in a heterosexual relationship, definitely complement each other. But in life, we're supposed to understand each other and be able to allow each person their personhood and the fullness of who they are, to be experienced, and not just to think, like, I hate to say it, but years ago, like, I was kind of like, as someone who's, not with men in an intimate way, I was kind of like, well, yeah, it's great to have male friends, because when you gotta move, I hate to say that, because that's one of those attitudes. I don't have that attitude anymore. Of course, men are usually stronger than I am, and a male friend could help you with something, but that's not the entirety of who he is. And I think that's what so many women, I think it's really complicated, but women grow up with, the family influences us so much, but there's a societal thing happening, right? And so I think work needs to be done on that level, and culturally as well, as in mental health for sure.
One thing I tend to observe is the attack on male self-actualization. And I see this on, like, basically both sides of the ideological spectrum, I suppose. One part says that men should stop being men and be more like women, but the other side says, you've got to be a man, but you got to do it this way and for the service of women and such. So it's like pulling arms being pulled from both sides. So there's no room for that self-actualization. So do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, like that makes a lot of sense, because I think when you say self-actualization, maybe in a way that's what I was referring to without thinking about it, in terms of becoming a fully, a human being with being able to express yourself for men, which means emotions and thoughts and feelings, all of that. And I think, so yeah, I think there's a real block to self-actualization for men. And I think also that, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought there. But yeah, I think that's hindered by the stereotypes that are really prevalent in culture about what a man is supposed to be. And if I can just say too, like a thought I was having, this just occurred to me recently. I've had it in different ways, but look at all the movies. Look at when like little, like, males are little boys in all the cartoons, And then look at all the video games. And what are they being taught and inculcated with there? But that they're the superheroes, the rescuers, and the fixers, and like so. I would think that a lot of that messaging, a lot of that inculcation of males, wouldn't give them a sense of that they can feel anything. They're just supposed to be wearing that cape all the time, and being the protector and doing the hard work, and always maybe putting the woman first. I don't know, but I think definitely, yes, men will, to varying degrees. I don't even think a lot of men get a chance to self-actualize. And that's something that needs big time changing.
Well, another thing for you to consider with the video game example is that while men tend to be the superhero, they're also the non-player character that you get to kill. Very, very rarely do you ever see a female character that you can shoot at. It's always a male character you get to shoot at. So while a man is the superhero, he's also the enemy.
Yes.
I want to shift focus a little bit, and again, I'm looking at your website, and it's a great website for everyone to look at. We'll provide the information for how to get there later. But in here, you talk about a relationship with a borderline narcissist and an alcoholic, and you talk about this relationship lasting for about a year with this woman. And you talk about all sorts of abuses that you suffered, but the worst part was after breaking up, it took you a few years to recover. Now, you've been doing this counseling for about 30 years, and you had your own experience through your family of origin, and it certainly weighed a lot on you when it came to counseling. But how do you feel that this experience, as bad as it was, did it enhance your ability to help men in any way?
Yeah, actually it did, because the person, the woman that I was involved with, she was like a borderline narcissist, but the fact is, she was first a counselor. So I don't want to throw too much into this, but I found out when I was 40 I had high-functioning Asperger's, and I was just looking for someone to talk to about that. And I end up in this woman's office, and she's a social worker, and then she's grooming me, and I'm not catching on to it in real time. Some could say I should have known better. But long story short, so there's everything wrong with this relationship from the get-go, and it's a proper trauma bond for sure, and abuse of power. But then what would happen later, as I was catching up to what was going on and trying to, help myself out, was I couldn't get any help anywhere. Because here we are, two lesbians. So you have your women's, like I didn't need a shelter, but you have all these services, again, for women that aren't there for men. And in this case, I was more, I don't want to say like a man exactly, but I was in this really one down, I'd been victimized by her. She was working in the system in the cities where we were living, and they were believing her. And she had friends in some of these agencies that I might have, because what I went through with this woman, because she was a professional, was that she, because she broke the ethics, the worst thing you can do, which is take, get never mind being a friend with a client, but having, an interpersonal sexual relationship with a client. So that is sexual abuse. And so when I tried to seek help, I was blocked every which way. And one of the problems, not going to dwell on this, but because we were both lesbians and these are, agencies for women's services, I felt like I was in the one down position. And I think this is what, I'm not comparing myself to a man, but because I'm somewhere in the middle of the spectrum, right? As a lesbian woman, I probably have a little more testosterone or whatever than the average woman, and I'm somewhere in the middle, and I think it helps me understand. But I couldn't get any help. And when I finally did go to a social worker that it looked like I could get some help from, then I put it together like they were friends. And I wasn't using my then ex, I wasn't using her name. And then I knew I had to tell her, I took the one session. But so the bottom line was, there's an inherent issue there. But yes, I think it's just more minimal experience as a lesbian woman in that situation, what must be happening for men when they don't even have the resources to try to look to go to, or and maybe and society has inculcated them that that would be quote weak and they shouldn't do that. So I mean, I think it really opened my eyes a lot. Like, it helped me to understand men a lot more, because and it was about an 18-month recovery process from that relationship, but the legalities of it went on for 3 years. But I couldn't find help anywhere. And it was just, I don't want to go too far into what that was really about, but I think it gave me a little bit of the experience of what many men might go through, but not in the way in which they go through it.
I want to say real quick before Vernon asks his question that hearing you talk about that kind of made me tear up a little bit. And I feel that way whether it was a man or a woman, but I think it's horrible that you went through that, and I wouldn't want to wish that on anyone, but I think it's also a blessing in disguise because you have more understanding of what men go through, and that is wonderful from an awful event, but it's wonderful that you can relate that way. And I'll admit it, if I could cry, I'd cry right now, so I'm not embarrassed to say that. So you go ahead, Vernon.
So without naming any particular names, can you share some success stories of the men you've worked with after you've worked with them? Any kind of breakthroughs for these individuals in terms of like self-actualization or overcoming their life issues?
Well, yeah, lots of breakthroughs, because the men that come to me are usually have had a relationship with a borderline or narcissistic woman, not always, but usually. And then there's codependency involved, and it goes right back to family of origin. It goes back to whether they were abused one way or another or not, or whether they not being seen and heard, whatever the problems were in the family of origin. It's something that it befalls a lot of men on top of everything else that they're not getting, and from childhood on. And so I work with men, like we start off with, often they have to talk about what's going on right now and the pain they're in and what they've been through. And then we go to the family of origin, and then we go to the role in the family of origin and how that worked. And then we talk about the parents and how was the parenting, what was the situation, siblings, etc. Really what I think I could encapsulate this is, so inner child healing work, etc. And what happens for men in that process is they're really learning, because I'm always talking about, like on my videos and stuff, that people need to do this work. It's about individuation. It's about self-integration. It's the shadow work. And men do get to self-actualize in this process because they get to find out who they really are. So from all of this woundedness on top of what might have happened to them in childhood, and the way that society inculcates little boys and men with all this, who they got to be and who they can't be and what's right and what's wrong, then the self-actualization really occurs when they really get through the healing, the grieving of what they were inculcated with, how they were wounded and hurt, and healing that, and then coming to know themselves. And the other thing that's really key in this, I think, it has some import to women as well, but even more so to men, is that the self-actualization is when they realize, the way I work with men is, and in this process, it's like, you have to, I don't tell people what to do, but the recommendation is don't date right now, stay out of dating. It could be 18 months to 2 years. You got to go through this process, get to know who you are. And it is a self-actualizing one, because maybe for the first time in many men's lives, they're not looking, and I don't think this is on men, it's like something, it's the lostness of how men aren't allowed to be, all who they are. But then when they stop the dating and the doing the healing work, they finally get in touch with who they are. So feelings and emotions and the softer things that are in men as well, because we're all yin and yang and we want to balance that. And so I think that whole process, so what really helps in that is helping men to stay away from women, and particularly the cluster B women, but helping men to focus more on themselves and this healing work, And I think one of the key ingredients in how they self-actualize through this process and go forward much differently and more knowing themselves as men and as people and with limits and boundaries, etc., is staying away from women for a time and actually doing all this healing work.
So I think we have time for one more question. And as I mentioned to you before the video started, I am writing a book series and I look at all sorts of men's issues, and sometimes it gets to me, like I just have to walk away and just clear my head. So I can only imagine what you must go through working with men, hearing their stories and trying to help them out, that it must mess with your psyche a bit. So I'm wondering, what coping mechanisms do you have to better serve your clients? Do you just go away? Do you have a therapist you talk to? What sort of things do you do to help make yourself more efficient?
That's a really good question. I think that the one thing you learn, and over years of working, as a mental health professional, is that, I'm right there with the client and the energy and the feelings and the emotions or the anger and the struggle of the client. But you just learn sort of how to let that go, after a little bit. But in the aggregate of it all, I mean, yeah, it's sort of like going and doing other things at times in life and shifting focus but it's interesting too that I find, and this might sound really counterintuitive or weird, but I'm like this, that it makes me in some of my I take spare time and downtime, but I also feel more like I want to understand so much more, so I end up spending some of that time also reading more and more about what's going on. Like I think if I get the title right, The Rational Male, and I've read so many of the books, and I just want to learn more. So I mean that in a way, believe it or not, it recharges me. It doesn't deplete me at all because I just want to understand as much as I possibly can, because again, knowing that I'm understanding quite a bit about men and working with men, but I'm not a man, so I have to keep remembering that. So, but just general ways in general of avoiding burnout and working on that and taking time away from things. And I just wanted to say too that it's something that because of the father that I had and because of where I come from, it doesn't feel very burdensome, to sit with men and to help men find themselves and to work through feelings of grief and to be able to feel and learn to feel safe in the process. It doesn't feel like it takes much from me. It just is a sacred honor, actually.
Well, I thank you for coming out today and talking with us, and I hope that a lot of men see this and seek out your help or seek out someone similar to you, because you are a great benefit. You're absolutely right. Us men, we'd like to open up to a woman. Opening up to other men, we can do it, but of course we also have an all-male group called Regarding Men that kind of serves that same function. And it's been a huge success from what I've seen, but I definitely hope that some men come out and reach out to you to get some additional help. So what is the best ways that people can find you?
I guess the best place to start, I mean, I talk about certain things on the YouTube channel, but ajmahari.ca and the YouTube channel is just youtube.com/ajmahari, but that's going to be more about if men have encountered borderline or narcissistic women. So ajmahari.ca would be the first site to go to, and there's a contact form there, and if a man for any reasons in his life would like to get some counseling, then definitely they can reach me there.
All right, that's going to do it for us today. And once again, I thank you for coming out. It has been so wonderful to talk to you, and it's just so much hopeful that you really have a great understanding, and I hope that this is a sign that there's going to be a lot more people out there with an understanding.
Well, thank you, and thank you so much for having me, and it was a pleasure.